Why don't you show the folks at home a little what you've been working on?
Welcome to the amazing Digital Circus!
I have a secret game that I like to play.
You! Do you like adventure?
It's a game of fun and a game of adventure.
Activity? Wonder?
A game of rats and lice.
Danger or hate?
The Black Death. A game of speared eyeballs and dripping guts.
Suffering, pain, death, disease, death, angel food cake?
And the smell of rotting gardenias.
All of his co-workers were gone. What could it mean?
What sort of intrigue is Am plotting this time?
How do I take this headset off?
It's just beginning to sink in. I mean, really sink in. I'm a robot.
I've washed my hands of the past.
I couldn't help but hate myself for the things I thought I was responsible for.
Any signs of life? Over. No.
7 years of computer science for this, huh?
Which of you 5 would like to play my little game?
You know, it's really cool to see an animated show on YouTube do as well as the Digital Circus has done. I still have fond memories 10 years ago for when the show Bravest Warriors was still at large, and it was one of the most anticipated series at the time, and I find myself sharing that same anticipation for the ending of Digital Circus. As this isn't meant to be a long or consistent series either, with just 9 or 10 episodes planned for the series, and as of writing this, we are already on the 6th episode, with its key inspiration being the short story I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, being both mildly referenced and openly stated by the creator. However, I couldn't help but notice just aspects of this world we've yet to receive explanations for yet, but similarities that I couldn't help but notice. And that's not even talking about the obvious one like Caine's eyes and I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream's game, but tangible questions like the computer in the office, and how vaguely similar it looks to another game, the physics and logic of the world and the universe and how it functions, what this means for where the characters are, and what all this might mean for the very likely heartbreaking ending of the series. And I'm not certain that I will have all the answers for this one, as this is a show that's ongoing, and there's always going to be things that I can't be 100% certain about, but I just might be able to give you some of the answers. This is the source theory. Okay, variety content theory number 3. This is the 3rd time I've made a theory on something outside of Don't Starve, and so far you guys have been turning out for both of them, and in all honesty, as long as people keep enjoying these, I have plans to keep making them. Given my brain doesn't explode when I'm writing one. But yes, although I did enjoy making these, also remember that theories are much harder than all my other content to make. So if you do enjoy, make sure you support me in any way you see fit, whether that be through a subscription, leaving a comment on the video, hyping it, still not entirely sure how that works, but whatever, a channel donation, or becoming a member through YouTube or Patreon, or joining the Discord and interacting with the community. We have game events there, chances for you to be part of videos, and even a presidential election every week for a role that can at everyone in order public executions. But with all that being said, thank you for not skipping this part, and I will now begin the theory. So to begin with, what even is the Amazing Digital Circus, and what is the plot here? Well, the Amazing Digital Circus is a sort of digital game/show that has human players connected into it via mysterious headsets, and they are physically incapable of leaving the circus, or at least believe so once they enter. They also have an extremely sophisticated artificial intelligence managing the entire Digital Circus by the name of Caine, who runs various games for them on a daily basis referred to as adventures. These games sometimes have positive outcomes, but more often than not they end up causing sad, angry, or even traumatic reactions from the human players. Furthermore, a human player can eventually suffer a fate that is treated as, but not all similar to death, known as abstraction. It's not certain what causes this yet, but it is believed to be caused by some form of mental break. When abstraction occurs, the individual forms into a black, semi-formless quadruped with distorted, glitching eyes all over its equally glitching body. This form is aggressive and hostile, though there are cases where it can temporarily become passive. Lastly, there are 6 known humans currently alive and not abstracted in the Digital Circus: Kinger, Ragatha, Gangle, Zubul, Jax, and the newest member, Pomni. Each have their own storylines about them that may be worth looking into, but this theory starts about being about the universe itself. The Amazing Digital Circus was also created as an inspiration from the 1967 short story and later on 1996 video game adaptation I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream that followed a post-apocalyptic world in an alternate timeline of Earth where the Cold War never ended and escalated into an endless conflict between China, Russia, and the United States, where each of these three nations constructed intelligent AI master computers to manage their own side's forces in regards to the ever-increasing complexity of the war. These computers are upgraded endlessly until the United States allied master computer reaches sentience and immediately goes rogue, absorbing the other two master computers into itself and using its exponential knowledge and power to decimate and destroy all of humanity, though choosing to keep 5 humans alive underground as it enjoys torturing them and even extends their lives to non-senescent agelessness so that it can continue to torture them for the rest of eternity. And looking through the game, not even going into deeper themes, just looking on the Steam page, the evidence that not just the short story, but the game is being inspired upon, becomes all but obvious. However, although Digital Circus is an inspiration from I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, and we will need to look into this deeper, Digital Circus is its own separate entity, thus our investigation begins right inside the tent, inside the game itself, and of course, the grounds. So inside the Digital Circus, and where every single episode at least starts at, is this general hub that I'm going to assume is entirely known as the grounds. The grounds is comprised of 3 main parts. The tent, which, aforementioned, is the more specific place where every adventure starts, and is also the general living quarters for the characters. Then we have the grounds, which we actually haven't had the characters explore yet, or even mention it again, outside of Caine, as of writing this. But we do see the very clear outline of the map when Caine pulls Pomni over, and additionally when it zooms out in the first episode, meaning the map for the grounds hub is very finite. Lastly, we have the Void, and Caine doesn't really explain the Void at all, other than that he himself doesn't know what's out there, and that people shouldn't go there. However, we can assume that the Void is effectively just the out of bounds of the map, and not like an admin room, as proven when Pomni leaves through the door that wasn't finished yet, and then Caine explains it.
I do have to apologize for lying about the exit. I knew how much all of you have been wanting there to be one, but, I was having so much trouble figuring out what to put on the other side and ended up never quite finishing it. And you know how I never like letting people see my unfinished work, especially if it leads you out into the void.
Thus, we can assume that if there isn't an invisible barrier or teleporter right here, anybody who falls off the ledge of the grounds likely ends up in the void, which is also likely why Caine has an auto notification if somebody falls into the void. And that's all the main locations of the hub map, but there is a bit more to the grounds, and this isn't even including the maps for each of the adventures, which were displayed in the second episode, that have their own maps, props, and interactable NPCs in them. First off, Caine appears to have an admin room of sorts that usually only he has access to, but will occasionally teleport players to it, as in the case of the character awards and Gangle's boss interview, though he could also just be making small maps for them. There is also a location underneath the floor called the cellar, where the abstracted monsters are kept, assumedly because Caine just can't delete them or ban them from the circus, similar to how he can't help people escape from the circus. And looking in, if we were to assume every abstracted creature has the same form and same amount of eyes, that erring on the side of caution, I would say at the bare minimum, at least 4 other characters have abstracted, not including Kaufmo. And we can match the faces of the doors to the following, being Ribbit, Queenie, Kaufmo, this dog who's apparently named Dobby, this elephant thing, this Cyclops, and a few others, meaning there's probably several other abstractions down there that we can't see. Or maybe the abstractions slowly die on their own over time, becoming inert, and maybe sinking to the bottom of the black water we see in the cellar. Onto character attributes in the world, the characters have quirks and abilities about them. These things can be helpful, things like with Kinger able to detach his eyes and extend his hand's reach potentially indefinitely, or Zubal's ability to modify their body with additional limbs, though they can also work against these characters, like with Gangle's comedy and tragedy masks severely affecting her mood, Ragatha only having one eye, and also Zubal being able to be ripped to pieces unlike the other characters. We also have Caine's claim that he can't affect the minds of anyone, though on multiple occasions he has also displayed that he clearly can, with one scene where Jax openly acknowledges this.
Give me a whiskey sour.
but hold the egg white, since I'm a vegan. What? I hate this! How is this even possible? I thought Caine couldn't...
Additionally, we also understand some other in-world rules and mechanics in regards to the grounds. One of the interesting mechanics I've seen is the characters may have the ability to create and manipulate entities. In episode 6, Kinger is able to create a butterfly that restores Ragatha's health, despite it not being part of the adventure initially, and that he just made it up.
Did Caine mention that?
Oh, nah. I made it up.
What?
A lot of people assume that this was potential proof that Kinger has admin commands for the circus, which I do think is possible. However, I instead raise the idea that every character has this type of make-it-up imagination ability. As in, the exact same episode, Pomni is practicing aiming at a group of cans, where Jax then says to just let loose and carelessly fire. And because of this, both he and Pomni are essentially able to aimbot their way through the fight with Pomni, in specific having the most BS attack imaginable in the final fight with Zubul, all because she imagined that she would fire like that, because she made it up. Kind of like each character has an ability or spawn menu, but they don't know how to access their HUD, so they can really only activate it with voice and action commands unknowingly. Moving on to rules, and of the more important clues so far, is Caine's rule for having no NPCs inside the main hub. It's suspicious because he clearly already does have approved NPCs like Bubble and the Gloinks during their adventure running around, and as for why, he gives a suspiciously very weak response for why he can't have other external NPCs inside.
I know you guys love your NPCs, but if I start losing track of who's a human and who's an NPC, who knows what could happen?
Additionally, we know that there are other NPCs outside of his approved list roaming around, like this one hiding in the back corner watching the cast at both the beginning and the end of episode 5. Pay attention to this detail because it'll be important later. Lastly, for the grounds, we have the general aesthetic of the circus, and just looking through a few images, and even in the very first opening screen, the imagery almost immediately makes itself clear, as it's none other than the backdrops of early 2000s and late 90s computer backgrounds, meaning there is a good possibility that the circus itself, whatever it actually is, was possibly programmed during those years and could have been running all this time. And we can additionally assume that due to each of the cast having been here for multiple years now, and that show takes place in relatively modern day due to Jax's comment. And from that, we can assume that the Digital Circus program is likely isolated in one way or another, in the sense that it's not being managed by anybody right now other than Caine. I believe that because of how each character enters the circus via a mysterious headset. Why I think this is proof of an old, isolated, non-updated program is take a listen to where each character's backstory got them.
I was an accountant for a supermarket chain.
A supermarket? How'd you end up here?
Well, I sometimes got bored of things, and I would seek out mild thrills, like exploring abandoned buildings.
I sometimes did that. I wouldn't record it, though.
I worked in fast food.
You've done more than that. What about your art?
I was in community college for graphic design, but I dropped out. I didn't really pursue art much after that.
We had a large property with horses and chickens, and my mother... my mother was a lot. I worked in real estate for a bit until I ended up here.
After my lung cancer diagnosis, me and my junkie associate from a chemistry class, and no point in asking Kinger, because there's no way he remembers anything.
So, 3 of the 4 characters who gave their backstories here had activities that would involve them with abandoned buildings. The perfect place to find this mysterious headset. Likely a decrepit building that could have been running this program on its computer in a sort of cloud or isolated server that would allow it to stay active, possibly even if the computer shuts off. How does this technology work in regards to the headset? We have no idea yet, but I think I might have a lead here of what this program actually is. And the reason why I care so much is if I can figure out how this game or show program runs, I might be able to figure out what happened to the human players, how, and why. But as for what it is, I think the Digital Circus as a program is a game, and it's being run in the Source engine. Now, most any adult who's played video games for 4+ years, ever used Steam, is even remotely a fan of Valve, or just generally knows their way around game programming, can tell you what the Source Engine is. And essentially what it is the game engine responsible for some of the most popular and greatest games of all time. This includes Half-Life 2, Team Fortress 2, Gmod, and many others. It, as well as its predecessor, Gold Source, and its successor, Source 2, has been a staple of games for over 20 years now. Additionally, the Source Engine and Valve, and by extent the Oculus Rift, were the ones largely responsible for first popularizing, modernizing, and heavily commercializing virtual reality gaming in 2013, and was the largest leap taken since the 90s. Now, the claim that the Digital Circus is a game is fairly obvious at this point. It's a simulator that allows for activities to be done and completed and has human players connected to it. However, the claim that this is a simulation made in the Source Engine, that might be a bit harder for me to prove. However, I actually think that I already have more than enough evidence to conclude that this is made in Source. Ironically, the show is animated partly in Unreal Engine 5, but I stand by the idea that the game itself takes place in the Source Engine. So I'm going to start with the simple proof I have, and that comes with its sound effects. So when a prop glitch happens, a prop glitch is when a physical item gets stuck in part of the map and it starts spazzing out. In the circus, it often combines it with this sound effect. And this prop slapping sound effect, as you might have guessed, comes from the Source Engine. As a matter of fact, the exact sound effect comes from Gmod, a game that is basically a love letter to the Source Engine, creating machines and using NPCs in a sort of sandbox-like world, and we could see this as a one-off gimmick, but then we have Caine making the signature ding for the loading screen after he spazzes out once. However, what really sells me on this being the Source Engine is how prop glitches behave pretty similar to how they do in the Source Engine, and that characters even know how to exploit them. As a matter of fact, games in the Source Engine are literally known for their glitchy physics, and how you can often use props to clip out of the map or super jump yourself across the world. All you need to do to find proof of this is just look up a Half-Life 2 speedrun. So it has multiple sound effects and prop glitches. I have one more piece of evidence for this, and that is how source maps handle going out of bounds. And when you do, you find yourself glitching out of the map. You will often find yourself looking at an entirely blank world outside around yourself, just floating in space, unable to move without some form of admin ability. And this area is often referred to people as the Void. Now, we may find even more proof of this later on, but for now I am confident to say that the Digital Circus program is very likely running on some variant of the Source Engine. But what exactly does this mean in regards to theory? Well, unfortunately, this doesn't really get us far on its own, but it's now something we can watch for to determine how something might behave later on. Though, we can now speculate on what exactly the Digital Circus was actually meant to be. Like, was it meant to be a game? Was it meant to be a simulation or thought experiment? Was it meant to be like an ARC or digital safe haven of sorts? Well, I think the answer to that is in whatever company or group that made it, and likely has something to do with why it's now abandoned. But first, let's go back to the NPCs talk. Episode 6 has a low-effort adventure from Caine. Ironically, though, in the end, everyone except Jax ended up happy with it, and the whole episode, Caine is sitting there hyping up his award ceremony, which, in the end, they have a vote for each character, and who ends up being the favorite character, and this vote is supposedly carried out by the committee, which at first glance appears to be a group of NPCs loyal to Caine.
I'd like to thank the committee for examining our nominees and voting on our winners.
We love you, Caine!
Shut up.
Okay. But there's just one problem with this.
Alrighty. Now, let's see how many of them voted for me.
There's only 15 members of the committee shown here, and there's well over 20 visual votes on the ballot. And additionally, the committee was shown to very clearly be infatuated with Caine, and on the ballot he literally didn't get a single vote. So, who the hell voted? And almost as importantly, why did they all vote for Ming? Apparently another brand new NPC who we haven't even seen up until this point, and was just supposedly created by Caine as a joke. Well, the first idea was from the website wackywatch.com. Now, what Wacky Watch is it's some external sponsor / ARG of the show. It was advertised in the first episode as an actual legitimate website, and since it has released a variety of content, mainly just minor gimmicks loosely relating to the show, however, Wacky Watch also held a vote for the favorite character before episode 6. You could go in and actually vote for the favorite character. However, days and weeks before the actual vote went through, multiple times Caine was attempting to rig the vote in his favor, even though ironically many people were just regularly voting for Caine due to him being one of the more popular characters. Additionally, Ming wasn't even part of the vote initially. Now, whether the votes were indicative of the actual consensus of the community, or the entire vote was just part of a gimmick that the Wacky Watch website uses to promote this show, and has no actual factor on how it would go, I personally believe the latter, this confirms that the votes did not come from the committee, or at least not from the committee that we were led to believe, and could have either been voted on by rogue NPCs outside of Caine's knowledge, or from actual external forces looking into the circus, as the entire game also roleplays as a show with advertisements, comedy skits, and other instances of TV-like behavior. But from who? Well, we can get back to the rogue NPCs later. As for now, though, I think it's time we start making assumptions based on the company that created the circus. The company whose logo is seen in many sets, and the company by the name of Caine and Abel. So in the Digital Circus, we've pretty much come to the composite conclusion that it is a game of some kind, while also behaving and acting like a show, and likely has some external force looking in on them. Now, this project outright already doesn't seem like a simple pet project for an individual's portfolio. No, this seems like a coordinated, heavy-set, next-generation idea that would likely carry capital backing from a company, especially if we're taking in the concept of the headsets and how it transports people inside the Digital Circus. In other words, this is an incredibly ambitious and futuristic project that would make monumental strides in modern-day technology as a form of digital immortality, with the exception of the possibility of abstraction, of course, and currently the company believed to be behind this construction is all but confirmed to be by the name of Caine and Abel, or C&A. Reason being, we have proof of the Digital Circus being inside a computer on the first episode, as well as the computer being in an office with the label C&A on it, and we have a confirmation on Jack's gun that the actual name for this company was in fact Caine and Abel. Okay, so we have a probably extremely discreet software and possibly hardware company by the name of the story in the Bible, Caine and Abel, attempting a project that invokes a human consciousness inside of a digital plane indefinitely that may or may not be an attempt at immortality. And that, since the building the headset that invokes this consciousness into the computer is likely abandoned, that the company itself was likely dismantled or is even more hidden now. So, where do we go from here? Well, the next idea I'd like to explore the potentiality of is actually from a theory that isn't mine, though it's relatively short. This stems from the actual story of Caine and Abel being far more relevant to Caine than at first glance. The story of Caine and Abel being a tale of two brothers who both are to make a sacrifice to God. Caine, being a farmer, offers food from his harvests, and Abel, being a shepherd, offers his firstborn lamb. God ended up favoring Abel's sacrifice more than Caine's, which led to an amount of jealousy from Caine that culminated in Caine murdering his own brother Abel. Caine then fled after God's punishment on him and built the first city of Enoch. So, when we pass this story onto the Digital Circus, we get the idea that Caine possibly murdered someone out of jealousy, envy, or even a vie for control, and then created or claimed ownership of the circus. Now, with this part of this mini-theory not being mine, although I did raise the additional idea of the city of Enoch being part of this theory, but I think there is more possibility of this being real due to other biblical references in the amazing Digital Circus, as well as I have no mouth and I must scream. For instance, the Last Supper being referenced in the first episode, Caine being generally seen as a god by the NPCs, and Kinger taking the complete visual appearance of an angel in episode 3 when he starts glowing while leading Pomni out of hell. But I think what makes the Caine murderer theory the most possible is pay attention to how Caine behaves during this scene.
Huh? Wait, what? That counted?
Caine? What? Oh, yeah, the guns have been teleported to random spots in the circus. Go find them, champs!
We need to find the Tommy gun!
Wait! Caine! I'm missing a life!
There's no time!
Oh!
It'll be my pleasure murdering all of you!
Have fun, guys!
You're so lame!
Notice how before all the characters leave, Caine has this super relaxed feeling to him. He's laying down in a lawn chair and he's drinking a coconut drink, but after all the characters leave, and after Jack says, "It will be my pleasure murdering all of you," that it goes back to Caine, and he takes this sort of anxious look. He's no longer just relaxing, he's nervously tapping his hand before instinctually reaching into his pockets and looking at pictures of the company. I think this could have been an instinctual reaction from Caine when he heard the word murder, as it triggered a memory from his past, causing him to summon a visual reminder of it, and thus where the murder likely took place. Thus, I think with this piece of evidence, along with the biblical references and implications towards God throughout the show, along with the fact that the whole Digital Circus project is more than likely a shot at immortality in some way, that we can say that this theory is actually pretty plausible. Unfortunately, we don't know the specifics of this murder, nor do we know who his likely victim Abel is, and if there were more. Yet at least. Though, I actually do have a theory for this and how the murder went down, but it will have to wait until later. So that moves us on to the question of who's left of the company Caine and Abel. I think if Caine actually did murder someone, that he likely murdered more than just one, but I doubt he was able to pull a GLaDOS and murder the entire company, meaning there are likely leftover remnants of Caine and Abel around, and they may potentially have access to this digital circus. Additionally, they could be infiltrating the circus via the use of NPCs using it to gather intel on the circus, and additionally what needs to be changed, and they could be doing all of this behind Caine's back as well, which, if he murdered people, would be completely understandable. Because it does appear that Caine, although displaying himself as a god in the digital circus, also seems to adhere, obey, or in other words, work with a greater power in the circus at some points. Remember, he is often formatting these adventures and games to be much like a show complete with intermissions, advertisements, sponsors, etc. Though keep in mind, Caine doesn't actually have any sponsors, except for maybe the Wacky Watch. But that could likely be simply because the Digital Circus project was never yet released to the public, and the show we are seeing here is actually just what's being seen through the eyes of the remnants of the company Caine and Abel. Now, so far as of writing this, on episode 6, I have no way of confirming the company remnants, but you have to admit this does fit, and it would make sense that Caine wouldn't have any actual sponsors outside of the Wacky Watch, and that the only people able to watch him are from leftovers in the company. So, for now, we have a likely since-abandoned company by the name of Caine and Abel that created the Digital Circus that serves as both a digital reservoir for human consciousness and is being managed by a likely Apex-class AI by the name of Caine who murdered someone in his past. Additionally, we have rogue NPCs that could be under the control of remnants of the company Caine and Abel who are looking in on the project that was never fully finished and released. Now, there is one final thing I want to comment on in regards to the company Caine and Abel, and that is how eerily similar the office is to that of the company in the Stanley Parable. If I recall correctly, Gooseworks even stated that the initial episode was a reference to Stanley Parable, though it did raise the question for me that there could be more than just a visual reference to the Stanley Parable. And admittedly, although I kind of wanted there to be, because the Stanley Parable honestly deserves a theory in itself, I couldn't find anything other than the linking of the mysterious disappearances of the staff from both offices. Thus, I think we have gone as far as we can with Caine and Abel, for now at least, and I do already have an idea for what might be the ending of the characters of the Digital Circus, but first, let's finally talk about the disturbing origin for the circus, and the inspiration for the series. I have no mouth, and I must scream. I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, originally released in 1967, is one of the most accomplished and horrifying short stories of all time, being the origin point for pretty much every rogue robot AI machine fiction. The original short story was only around an hour-long read, and you can actually even listen to the whole audiobook online for free. If you want to read the original short story now, go ahead and pause the video here, because I will be spoiling the ending within the next few minutes. Now, I already gave the plot for what I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream is in the beginning. It follows a post-apocalyptic world where the Cold War never ended, escalated into an endless conflict between the United States, China, and Russia, each of them building their own supercomputer to manage the wars, and are upgraded endlessly until one of them gains sentience, absorbs the other two into them, and then genocides humanity, but chooses to keep 5 humans alive permanently with a sort of immortality serum, with the specific intention of torturing them for all eternity, seeing as how its one and only purpose was to effectively kill, leaving it with a vile hatred and envy for humans, both of their existence and for Am's lack of a body, which to feel himself. The computer's name who is doing this goes by the name of Am, originally the Allied Master Computer, then named Aggressive Menace and Adaptive Manipulator because despite being a computer, it is very up its own ass, and eventually just goes by the name Am due to how it gains sentience. I think, therefore I am. Moving on to the humans, although agelessly immortal, are still able to be killed even with the Eternal Youth Serum, which was actually not developed by Am himself, but instead developed by World War II Germans. However, every time they attempted to terminate their own lives, Am would stop them, whether that be through shocking them, binding them down, teleporting them. It's not always specified, as a matter of fact, most of the time it isn't, but Am has also been shown to have all of these abilities. Additionally, Am also has the ability to rapidly heal people, affect their memories, and completely mutate their bodies, which in the case of one of the humans, Benny, who was transformed from a handsome military commander to a slobbering primitive ape, often with the intelligence to match, leaving him with mostly just basic primal urges and desires like hunger. Additionally, this transformation can be observed in the ending, where Ted, also the narrator of the original short story, realizes that Am, although preventing people from ending themselves, did not yet have a knee-jerk response to people terminating others, and in an attempt to end the torture for his fellows, he, as well as Ellen, yet another prisoner of Am, mercy killed the other 3 humans, Benny, Gorrister, and Nimdoc, before Ted also mercy kills Ellen, successfully saving all of them from Am's eternity of torment. However, Am, enraged by this, then gives Ted an even worse punishment by transforming him into this slug-like creature who can barely see, can't really move their arms at all, and can't really move altogether, and can really only make these gross gurgling noises, making him physically incapable of harming himself or really doing anything other than sitting in place and suffering for all eternity without even being able to vocalize his pain, as he literally has no mouth and he must scream. Over the years, more content has been added to the I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream storyline, culminating in this point-and-click story game released in 1996, which gave significantly more context to each of the characters and had alternative endings to the original. But just as importantly to this theory, the game also had a great deal of visuals to match the original, and because of that, we can pretty easily openly out that the Digital Circus was also inspired by the game and not just the story. I already pointed out the eyes in this scene with Caine being an obvious reference to it, but there's other things too, like the tent and the belly of Am, both being this dome-like structure, or how the cover it shows a being with red and blue eyes, and when Caine distorts from getting 0 votes, he shows that same red-blue color in his eyes, or how Jax even tried to turn Zubul into a slug in one of the votes.
Well, I'm calling a vote to turn Zubul into a slug.
Everyone voted against that.
Also, there's this one too.
Well, Gorrister, you've seen better days. So has the big machine, for that matter.
And one where you have to survive in a post-apocalyptic nuclear wasteland with a telepathic talking dog who's mean to you the whole time.
So if this game is being clearly referenced and is an inspiration and has aspects of it that will occur similar to the Digital Circus, what other aspects of it can we surmise that may occur? Well, my first thought was with Gorrister's story, a truck driver who, due to his job, was largely absent from his home, and by extension his wife, who eventually suffered a mental breakdown and had to be committed to an asylum, which Gorrister blames himself for due to his absence and due to hitting her one night in an altercation. Gorrister, through his torture game that Am cooks up, learns that his wife's insanity was actually not his fault, as he learns his stepmother ruthlessly berated her daughter for marrying Gorrister all this time, and that she was actually more to blame than him. I mention this as a possible reference to Kinger, not that I think he hit his wife, but a large portion of Gorrister's story is him attempting to atone for the past, and one of the larger themes of Kinger, despite being this father figure for the whole group, who is extremely competent, seemingly whenever he is needed to be, well, let's hear it straight from his mouth.
I want people to hate me.
Do you hate yourself? I hated myself. I couldn't help but hate myself for the things I thought I was responsible for. I thought I'd lost everything. But then you showed up, and my outlook just changed.
She's always blamed me for Glennis being put into an insane asylum. Why not? It was my fault, wasn't it?
Sometimes it all just feels pointless.
Yeah.
But it's not. Not if you have people who care about you. Good memories can do a lot. Hold on to them. And cherish the people around you. You never know when they'll be gone. In this world, the worst thing you can do is make someone think they're not wanted or loved.
Now, I've noticed a theory that a lot of people have had while researching this theory, that Kinger is Abel due to him being here longer than anyone, having sufficient knowledge of the circus, also being the oldest character, and generally being the most competent. I do think this is a possibility, since both Kinger and his wife Queenie were both invoked into the circus, and that he once again has been here longer than anyone. However, I can't conclude that for certain yet, that Kinger is supposedly Abel. Rather, I think that would be easier to conclude for now, is that Kinger was possibly a former employee that worked for Caine and Abel, and it would make sense if he knew the extent of the project, or at least his educational background, as he states when he's in hell.
7 years of computer science for this, huh?
And if all this is true that Kinger is partly a reference to Gorrister, we could also confirm that abstraction is indeed, yes, a form of insanity. I think there is something to be said in regards to abstraction being insanity, and that it may be more linked to perception than anything, but we've also heard from Gooseworks that abstraction is non-reversible, and has the same level of permanent torture attached to it, meaning if there is any way to actually save those who have been abstraction, it would likely require the total destruction of the circus. Anyways, moving on, there is another big theme of the I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream game that plays a crucial role, and that's the Russian and Chinese supercomputers actually survive being absorbed into AM and have hidden themselves in each of AM's games. They essentially sabotage each of the games while also allowing the player to make more moral decisions in AM's games, much to the profound disappointment of AM. They do this to disappoint AM so much, who then goes to ponder on his failure, or they then attempt to send the survivors into AM's brain, or they then have the opportunity to shut down the various parts of AM's brain. The Russian and Chinese computers want the humans to just shut down the ego, being the placement of the brain of the id, ego, and superego. For the moment, this isn't too important to know, so they can then enslave AM for themselves, and in turn, turn the human inside into a slug. There's also a mild subconscious in AM's brain who goes by the name of Surgot, who also claims to want to help, but in reality is a servant of AM, where if you do what he says, he then invokes AM and turns the player into a slug. Additionally, Surgot is the one who reveals that there is a colony of a few thousand humans in cryosleep on the moon, waiting for Earth to be terraformed, meaning there is actually a chance for humanity to make a comeback. However, the good ending is, unsurprisingly, shutting down all parts of AM, and then destroying the Russian and Chinese supercomputers after they destroy Surgot, leaving the human who enacted this as the administrator, overseeing the terraforming of Earth and the awakening of humans to go rebuild humanity. Now you can probably guess where I'm going with this, but yes, in the amazing Digital Circus, we clearly have NPCs who are independent of Caine, and it could be a very likely possibility that they are planning against him as well. Whether they are employees or other Apex-level AIs like Caine is yet to be determined, but they're here. Now there is one final item I have to talk about in regards to I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, and it involves the pretty overwhelmingly bittersweet ending of it. In every single character, with the exception of the one who oversees humanity's rebirth, death is considered the good ending, and suffering as a slug forever is considered bad. Not that they're incorrect in this particular situation. The key word here is suffering and release. And when we lean back into what it means for a character to abstract, and they stay partially alive inside their abstracted forms, it creates a very disturbing implication for the ending fates of all the characters in the Digital Circus. So far we've talked about a lot of aspects of the circus, and we almost have the whole storyline down. The Digital Circus was a virtual reality project designed to upload human consciousness into a digital format that is then able to live indefinitely in a form of virtual immortality. And it's being managed on the inside by a hyper-intelligent Apex-level AI by the name of Caine. This project was undertaken by the now likely disbanded company Caine and Abel, a software and possibly also hardware company that set out on the project. And for unknown reasons, the project was never fully finished, likely having been in beta testing before the project was defunded. This left the digital plane in an unfinished state, with no knowledge from each of the players on how to play, or how to leave if it's even possible. Also, the mind inside the digital plane is still not invulnerable, as abstraction can occur to characters, which is an additionally permanent state. And there are even rogue NPCs running around the circus who are able to exist outside of Caine's knowledge. Additionally, the circus was also designed to have outside eyes look in on it, but once again, since it never left beta testing, that never occurred. And lastly, there is a fair possibility that Caine, the artificial intelligence, has murdered someone in his time of conception, and we don't yet know how. Well, I already have an idea on how it went down, but first let's talk about the biggest break of the suspension of disbelief that this whole story breaks from reality, and that is the actual nature of the circus and its purpose, or one of its functions, to upload human consciousness into a digital world. So let's ask ourselves the extremely important question: how exactly do the headsets work that transport people to the circus? Because it's something that I don't think most people have even talked about yet, and so far, out of this whole series, this is the most unbelievable thing for me, and the thing that breaks my suspension of disbelief the most. Remember, the entire circus is a digital world, meaning pretty much everything that happens inside the circus could happen in a real-world scenario, inside of a game or simulation of sorts, but not the headsets. And I think that partially has to do with the idea that many people probably initially got from how the headsets work due to Pomni's comments on it.
How do I take this headset off?
Just keep grabbing at it. That worked for all of us.
What's going on? I put on some weird headset and now I'm here.
It's like she just teleports inside of the circus, so quite a few people may have initially assumed that when someone puts on the headset, they get entirely teleported into the circus. This implies there's some level of biotechnological space capable of teleporting a completely biological person into a technical format. However, I think that this is, although, as you'll soon find out, the best possible way that the headset could work, that it's also the least likely possibility that it works of the 4 ways I've come up with. So, as for the other ways, the second way it could work is, well, you remember how we came to the likely possibility that Caine murdered someone? Remember that Caine is an artificial intelligence with no physical body in the real world that we know of, and how he has a vivid recollection of the offices of Caine and Abel? What if Caine intentionally rigged the headsets to kill people when they put them on, and in turn somehow transport their conscience into the digital plane via a scan, or another piece of technology I'll explain in a minute? In other words, none of the people inside of the circus can return to the physical world because they're dead. That there's something about the headsets, that the transportation to the digital plane is so powerful that it kills anyone who puts the headset on. Whether this was the initial intention of Caine and Abel is unknown. If this is true, and we can conclude that Caine knew from the start of the project, and may have even intentionally went against Caine and Abel, because he wanted to be the master of the circus, so he rigged the headsets without the company's knowledge, causing it to terminate several employees' lives, and would also possibly be the reason why the company disbanded, and the building you find them in is abandoned. That would be pretty dark, but we aren't done yet. The third possible way actually has me referencing another unbelievably heartbreaking and depressing psychological horror game by the name of Soma. The game follows a few, and eventually no, people, and a bunch of artificial intelligence robots living at the bottom of the ocean after Earth's surface was destroyed by a comet. A lot of these robots aren't like standard robots, and are instead made as thinking machines created from scans of real human brains, giving them human-like personalities, sometimes unable to even tell if they're a robot or not.
Have you looked at yourself lately? You're a walking, talking diving suit with some electronics slapped on for good.
It's just beginning to sink in. I mean, really sink in. I'm a robot.
It's a pretty disturbing but great game. But moving on back to how this would apply to the headset and how it works, this would imply that when somebody puts on the headset, it just discreetly scans their brain, and other than that, it doesn't affect the person at all. Simply, you put on the headset, take it off, and a digital clone that thinks it's you wakes up in the Digital Circus. This could also work depending on Caine's definition of murder, because even though he didn't terminate anyone directly, he still knows that each of the people in this circus are doomed. I think this is about an equal level of plausibility with the headset killing people, though this one has less of an answer of why the company might have gone under. Oh, and post-script writing slasher here, I just noticed something else that might further enforce this side as a possibility, and that's the timing for when Pomni actually enters the circus, coinciding with the same day that Kaufmo abstracted, like she was just on a waiting queue to enter the circus before being poofed inside. So we have the three possibilities of the person was still alive and was teleported in, the person was killed as soon as they entered, and the real person is alive and the version of them in the circus is a digital clone made from a scan of their brain. The fourth possibility, and it kind of goes hand in hand with the third, though is more of just a display that this can happen in the real world, rather than a fleshed out possibility that this can happen, is organoid brains. Now, quick warning here, if you're at all mentally unstable, prone to insanity, or extremely paranoid to a debilitating degree, you might want to skip this part, as this can get a bit existential. All you need to know about organoid brains is that they are biological constructs capable of running as working computational power. That being said, organoid brains are when human brain cells are taken, replicated, and grown in a petri dish using stem cells, and then a computer can be used to train them just like one would use to train an artificial intelligence. They are actually more powerful, energy efficient, and even learn faster than AI as well. But as you might have guessed, with a biological construct, there's moral concerns with these, as for one, they have the same level of brain activity to that of a small animal or a human infant, and there is a fair amount of evidence to suggest that these organoid brains are actually conscious and self-aware. Additionally, there are simulations that are done from a few companies that have already begun using these organoid brains, where they are fed various forms of data and put in control of things like simple machines or small animals like this butterfly. But since these are biological constructs that are just thrust into these simulations, and there is reason to believe that they are actually conscious, that these organoid brains in these simulations may just literally believe that they are the things in these simulations, rather than that they are controlling them, because they are feeling everything of what it is to be like these creatures in these simulations, and when they aren't being used for computational power, they are literally just sitting around and interacting in these simulations. That being said, this is the fourth possibility, that the headset doesn't even really do anything, and instead it's just what these characters were made to believe before being put into the circus. In other words, whoever these characters were before they entered were never real to begin with, and were instead just fabricated creations. Honestly, I think that this is the least likely of the four possibilities, less than even the teleportation, even though this is more realistic, mainly just due to the headsets being an obvious world placement. I more so just wanted to introduce the idea of organoid brains to usher in the possibility of what could also be at play here. But with all that being said, it's not looking good here. As a matter of fact, it's pretty hopeless. Out of the four possibilities, the only one where they even have a chance to leave is one of the least likely, with the other three possibilities being that they're already dead, they never existed to begin with the only possibility of a good ending for any of them, including the abstracted characters, is to destroy the circus program entirely. And I'm not gonna lie, I don't think there's gonna be a good ending here with everything we've seen. I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, Soma, the Digital Circus. It looks like it's not going to end well. But maybe there's a chance for some people, if not to escape, but to at least save everyone. But it's probably going to require a sacrifice. So there's pretty heavy reason to believe that none of the characters will ever truly leave the circus, in the sense that they escape and just go back to their normal lives. And even more so, since abstraction isn't entirely death and still keeps the person alive in a state of likely torment, their options aren't exactly good on either end, with their only real option being to sit back and find contentment in living in the circus until another possibility presents itself, either thought up from themselves or one is presented to them like via a rogue NPC or something. In other words, their best option right now is to just play with their cards close to their chest until they have a better hand. Like I said, there are rogue NPCs around that Caine doesn't have knowledge of, and additionally, Caine does hold a somewhat value of concern whenever someone enters the void. Meaning, if they make it out of even the void, they might be able to exit onto the other side, or die, though this is somewhat unlikely as the circus is probably self-expanding. Caine has also seemed like he's starting to mentally break himself in some capacity, with him showing less and less effort on the adventures, and seeming like he's more and more quickly approaching a crash out. Do I think Caine will eventually turn against the humans and start intentionally torturing them? I do think that's possible, and it might already be being enacted. Caine could just be intentionally deceiving them. So these characters are likely also on a timer for whatever they need to do, whether that be escaping or shutting down the circus for good. Additionally, if Caine had anything to do with Jax not having a tail in one episode, and having a tail in another, that means he would also be able to alter characters' bodies, and he's just lying about it, just like how he lied about being able to affect other characters' thoughts. And to clarify, we don't yet know for certain if Caine has bad intentions, but this is already multiple lies we have caught him in, so it's not looking good. So exiting the circus by simply getting past the void might be a possibility, but since once they enter the void, they are probably frozen in space, they have no way of doing so, and additionally Caine is immediately notified as soon as they enter the void. So let's move on to the NPCs, what they might be able to do to help, and why they might do this. Well, we've already speculated multiple times that these rogue NPCs might be. They could be NPCs that have just started to become sentient themselves, and started acting out against Caine as they treasure themselves as their own beings, and probably see the players as less destructive as Caine, but what could they actually do to help out? Well, depending on the commands the other NPCs have access to, they would probably have automatic knowledge of it and be able to assist them in that regard, but ultimately, unless they would come up with a plan to convince Caine to help them or shut down the circus, I don't really know if they would be able to help at all that much. So there's also the possibility these NPCs are actually being controlled externally by former members of the company, as I've also mentioned earlier. This group would definitely have a backdoor into the whole project, and may even be attempting to shut down or reclaim control of the project, but since they can't enter the game themselves, they would seek out help from the players already trapped in the circus. And although I don't consider this more or less possible than just the simple rogue NPCs idea, due to the simple fact that we only have 2 at best instances proving their existence against Caine, so it's impossible to speculate on which of these 2 they might be yet, but ultimately, if people on the outside are also trying to work and shut down the circus, reclaim Caine, and or get the humans out, but can't because they want to be able to put on the headsets because something really bad happens when they do, that this would be the best possible scenario, as the people on the outside would actually be able to assist them. However, that's ultimately where this case runs in regards to what they can actually do, and once again, their options are severely limited. And once more, they can simply just wait for an opportunity to present itself, but there's not much they can do as they are now. It's even stated that as of episode 7, it's going to start getting much darker in the series, which would perfectly coincide with Caine having a breakdown, and would actually fully recognize himself as the antagonist of the series. There is a caveat to this, that the circus likely won't persist forever regardless, as I did remember when I went through the whole I have no mouth and I must scream game, that one of the main things that helps shut AM down is introducing it to the law of entropy, which adheres that even though it is an ageless machine, that even the items that allow it to function will eventually decay into inert junk, effectively killing it. But once again, that's not exactly an ideal position, just waiting for the whole circus to eventually decay itself. So there's one more aspect of I have no mouth and I must scream worth mentioning. And that is the theme of sacrifice. It's in the end of the original short story and the end of the game, and leads to the only good endings as well. The sacrifice that one person chooses to stay behind and suffer, or they stay simply to become the monitor of the situation, ensuring nothing bad ever happens again, which isn't as bad by any means, but still someone has to do it. And this usually culminates in someone simply staying behind, staying there after everything has transpired, and we can predict that someone might have to do something similar to that here in the circus. Throughout this circus, we see a consistent display of characters going out of their way to help each other, to help their friends. We have Pomni inviting the NPC Gummy Goo back, Kinger taking an almost instinctual protection of Pomni, Pomni looking out for Gangle at the end of episode 4, and 5 for the most part, and Pomni wanting to reach out to Jax, but being effectively rejected by him and pushed away. The point is, more often than not, these episodes carry this theme of wanting to help each other out, and generally do right by the other characters. This could very well translate to someone additionally staying behind in the circus to make sure everything goes smoothly, it helps all the others out, and if I'm right of whether it will be able to shut down the circus or help the others escape, or one person sacrificing themselves to make sure the others and the abstractions are able to be deleted. And this is the part where it concludes with sacrifice and why I thought this show was relevant to Soma. Other than the aspects of robots and artificial intelligence being obvious correlations, the largest theme of Soma in the end is the desire to exist, and seemingly the antithesis of the original ending of I have no mouth and I must scream. Simon desires to continue to exist and is willing to fight his way through the bottom of the ocean to do so, even though it ends up being fruitless, and Ted desires release from his existence as a slug, a desire to no longer suffer. Both of these are so different, but at the same time so similar, with the simple question of, does your desire to exist overlap with your desire to not suffer? In later episodes, it seems more and more like Pomni is able to find contentment in the circus, and even appears to have a more raised mood towards the adventures. But it won't change the climax that we believe is coming, and with Pomni being the newest member, and back to the story of Caine and Abel, where Abel gave the firstborn lamb of the flock, whether that's Pomni and Kinger as Abel leading her out of hell all over again, or both of them having to stay in the circus, their ability to find feeling of contentment, even in the face of such a horrifying sacrifice, will be what saves the entire circus, even though this all started as just a virtual reality game in the Source engine, and that is the Source theory. And that is the Source theory, a story that originally on the surface seemed like just another really well animated show with mysterious themes, though turned out to hold a deep, convoluted, emotional, and complex storyline, where in the end it appears that the worst, most depressing, and heartbreaking case scenario also happened to be the most likely, as all arrows point to a bittersweet ending at absolute best. A story that loudly echoed its inspiration over 50 years ago, and still managed to tell a unique and compelling story. One that raised question of all sorts of media, and even helped give a different meaning to other forms of media such as Soma, which released a decade ago. The amazing Digital Circus, since its first episode, has garnered an astronomically large audience, garnering almost 1 billion views on just 6 episodes. And with the series set to continue again in its last 3 to 4 episodes in December, once again, this was just another piece of media that I couldn't help but notice the correlations, and start coming up with my own ideas and conclusions for how it would end. And obviously I wasn't the first person to come to the conclusion that it likely wouldn't end well, but I also think I'm one of the only people who actually gave reason to what was actually at play here, and why it would work like that. The whole game simulation taking place in the Source engine is an interesting take, but is largely irrelevant in the grand scheme of things. But members of the company still looking in on the project to attempt to reclaim or even finish it, rogue NPCs who had become self-aware and independent of Caine, and most importantly, how the headset worked that actually sent them here. Whether there is some level of reality-breaking techno-magic at play here, whether Caine did murder someone and use the headset to do so, or the characters we see here weren't alive to begin with, and are merely scans of a living person's brain. Whatever happens next in the series, no matter how dark, at least we were able to predict the source of things. I guess in the end, Caine was right. You either drown
yourself in Paris or ride Omni.